Today, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the POCO F4 and F4 GT so you'll understand which one is the right pick for you. Let's get started. Selamat pagi! Good morning everyone, Kenneth here and welcome to another comparison video. Now this one is a little bit different than usual because I'm doing it live and it's something that I've never done before. So let me know if there's anything that I can improve, I would gladly do so. And as always, my full disclosure is down in the description below, which basically means I always tell you my own honest opinion. This is very important to tell you. Otherwise, affiliate links are down below if you want to support me and the channel, so thank you very much for that. And let's get started right now into the comparison. Starting with the physical features here, we're going to talk about the back panel first, but I just want to highlight that these two phones are actually not glass phones. I'm not really sure because if I tap on it like this, that does feel like plastic. If I tap on this, I'm also not sure the first time I unboxed it that feels like plastic, but this has a matte finish whereas the F4 GT has a glossy finish and it is much more prone to fingerprint. So yeah, we're gonna talk about the camera in a different section later in the video, much more in depth. For now, let's talk about the most important differences on the sides here. So we still have the power button / fingerprint sensor, very fast ones here. As you can see there, that's pretty much instant. They are not under display fingerprint sensor, so some people might complain, but for me that's perfectly fine. But as you can see, the layout is a little bit different on the F4 GT here, and that's because the GT is a gaming focused device. And as you can see here, we have a magnetic pop-up physical shoulder buttons. Now this is a selling point in my opinion compared to other gaming phones that use capacitive triggers. This one is much more tactile. You can physically feel that you are pressing. So I personally like this better, even though they are a risk for water to come in. And this mechanism also is not like the best thing in the world because it rattles a bit. Can you hear that? This thing moves. Okay, now moving on to the next most important part here is these antennas. So not only you get it at the top and bottom, you also get it on the sides. This is done so that you are not going to ever cover that part. We also have more antennas at the bottom here, and as you can see, more antennas right here and down here as well. So tons and tons of antennas. We don't have such thing on the F4 here, probably because this is made of plastic, so they don't need to make a plastic cutouts anymore. Otherwise, thickness wise, the F4 GT is slightly thicker at 8.5, the F4 is at 7.7, but when you hold it in your hand, it feels like a little bit rough on the edges here, whereas on the F4 GT it feels much more nicer in the hand. So that's something to consider also, but if you're using a case, that doesn't matter much anyway. But yeah, let's move on to the next most important difference, and that is the speaker placement. So both devices has dual speakers here, one at the top, one at the bottom. The difference is the POCO F4 has one smaller speaker at the top, as you can see here, and a larger speaker down here, whereas on the F4 GT, we have exactly the same speaker on top and bottom. And you can see the cutouts are very big. That's because it has two sets of speakers inside, one for woofer, one for tweeter. And also take a look at this placement down here. If you're holding it like this, then you're not going to cover the speakers, which is good. But on the top side, you can see that the speaker of the F4 is actually down here, because normally, right, the cameras take up this space, but somehow the F4 GT still has this camera right here. Probably that's a smaller module, that's why they are able to fit in a large speaker down here, but they still put it up there anyway. And so the advantage here is if you are going to play, then you're not going to cover the speaker, whereas on the F4 you are going to cover it. But yeah, otherwise we have the standard features, microphone holes here, IR blaster down here. We also have a SIM card tray on the F4. We have more microphones, USB-C charging port. But the more important part is this another hole right here, which is a third microphone hole. So this basically means whenever you're playing, you're not going to cover the microphones like you will do on the F4. Okay, moving on to the next aspect, let's talk about battery. And capacity wise, I don't think there's much difference between the two here. On the POCO F4, we've got 4,500 milliamp hour, whereas F4 GT is slightly bigger at 4,700. I've been using the phone, gaming with it for the past couple months on the GT and past couple days on the F4. And as you can see, the screen on time is about 7 hours, which is about, similar. And it's worth noting that both devices drain about 20% of battery per hour of gaming at max settings. So for example, I play Genshin a lot with all of these devices, and they behave pretty much the same way. I don't notice any significant difference. Now, the one big difference between the F4 and F4 GT is the charging speed and the included chargers. On the F4 side, we've got 67 watts charger, and on the GT side, we've got 120 watts of charger. Now, if you compare this to a normal charger, then this might look super big and super heavy, but actually this is amazingly small because my MacBook charger is about like twice as big as this thing. And the 67 watts charger is even more impressive because it is lighter, it is significantly smaller, much more pocketable, and the beauty of this is not only it charges your phone at full speed, you can also use it to charge your laptop if they support USB-C charging with the same exact cable that came with the POCO F4, and you will charge it at full 65 watt speed. Unfortunately, with the GT 120 watts here, this only outputs at 65 watts to a laptop. So that's worth noting right there. Now, what about if we charge the phone itself? So let's take a look at the POCO F4 here. I've charged the phone for 26 minutes, went from 18 to 83%. We've got a 65% increase. And that looks normal. For most phones, you will leave it for half an hour and it will increase 50, 60, 70%. But then check out the F4 GT results. As you can see here, I've only charged for 11 minutes here, and I went up from 8% to 81%. So it charges more than the F4 in less than half the time. That's just the very revolutionary thing that I found with the F4 GT. It charges really, really fast. You will just have to plug it in for 5 minutes and it will get you back up to 80% in no time. And if you leave it for another 5 minutes, it will be 100%. It is just that crazy. So I won't lie to you, the F4 is really fast. 67 watts is twice of what the POCO F3 can do last time. But this is game changing and you won't know it until you experience it yourself. Now, if you're worried about battery life, overheating and everything, on the F4, the hottest it can get is 39 degrees while charging. Screen off, by the way. On the F4 GT, that's significantly hotter at 42 degrees. But if we consider regular gaming on these things, the F4 GT regularly goes 42, 45 degrees. Even the POCO F4 can be like that as well. So honestly speaking, I'm not too worried about this, but what I'm gonna do is continuously charge these phones at their max speeds, and I will report back the battery life and the performance after 6 months of usage, 1 year of usage, to see if they degrade faster than your normal battery. If this video has been helpful for you so far, please give this video a thumbs up, share it around, and also subscribe for more contents, because I also have the POCO X3 Pro that I've been using for the past year, and I'm going to compare this to whatever phone you see fit. Let me know down in the comments below, and let's move on to the next important aspect, the screen. So taking a look at the front side here, you might see that, okay, they are exactly the same screen. 6.67 inch, 1080p display for better or worse, 120 Hz refresh rate, but there are some very important differences that are better on the F4 GT. And the first one is the bezels. Let's take a closer look at the POCO F4 here. So we can see that the bottom bezel here is larger than the other sizes. That's because the screen connector is actually on this side. And on a cheaper phone like this, they cannot afford to just fold the screen so that the bezel will be smaller. Let's take a look at the F4 GT right here. And as you can see, it's more or less about the same size on all sides, top to bottom, left to right, and it's not only more pleasing to look at, but also feels more premium. And also take a look at that corner. This corner is actually now like it doesn't cut as much as the screen compared to the F4 here. But if compared to the previous F3, then the screen is just like this. So that's why I'm just telling you, you are paying more for a lot of stuff on the F4 GT here. Now, the differences don't end there because we've got so much more, and starting with the glass, this thing has Gorilla Glass 5 on the F4, whereas on the F4 GT, we've got Gorilla Glass Victus, which is like Gorilla Glass 7 basically. It has more impact resistance, like up to 2 meters of drop if I'm not mistaken, while also still being pretty scratch resistant. Now, another important difference on the F4 GT is it actually has a higher frequency dimming. And just take a look at this real shot I took like a while back. On the F4, you can see that there's lines going from down to top in like a quite wide interval and quite slowly. Whereas on the F4 GT, this happens like much faster, very little lines going from down to top, and this happens at like 0% brightness basically. So when you're using these phones in a dark room, the F4 GT will feel more comfortable when compared to the F4. And not only that, the F4 GT also has a higher touch sampling rate and a higher resolution touch sensitive area, which everything comes together again in the focus for gaming on the F4 GT. Now there's one thing that is better on the F4, and that is the dot camera. As you can see here, the F4 GT has a normal like big-ish looking dot camera. Let me get it closer here, whereas on the F4, it is very small, like they say 2.5 millimeters or something. That's not a surprise to anyone here because the F3 also has this kind of very small camera. Finishing the topic of the screen here, on the top here, you can see this refresh rate of both phones, and these, feature dynamic frame rate switching. So as you can see here, if I don't touch the screen, it refreshes at 60, but the moment I start tapping, then it ramps up to 120 Hertz. And let's see the always on display here. If I turn it off, then it's gonna be at 30 FPS. Now, these are not LTPO display because it has a very limited refresh rate, like 30, 60, 120, just like I demonstrated to you before. Whereas on LTPO displays, they can vary like more granularly. And then on the always on display, it could go as low as 1 frame per second, which theoretically will save more battery. But yeah, that's just the nature of both phones right here. All right, touching connectivity a little bit, because both uses Qualcomm solution. We've got 5G mobile data connectivity. We've got Bluetooth 5.2 support with all the codecs supported, starting from Haptics, Haptics HD, as you can see here, Haptics adaptive, that's supported as well. I'm gonna disconnect from the GT and connect on the F4, as you can see, Haptics adaptive. And also we've got LDAC support. If I turn it on like this, as you can see on my Vio BTR5, it is indeed using LDAC. So all the codecs are covered here. Now lastly, on the Wi-Fi side, we've got Wi-Fi 6 support on both sides here. It's just on the F4 GT, we've got Wi-Fi 6E support, which is an extended version of Wi-Fi 6 that's even faster, but it acts more like a future-proof in case you will have better internet and better Wi-Fi router moving forward. All right, so now let's talk about something that we cannot see. This cannot be put on the spec sheet, and that is the haptics. On the POCO F4 side, we've got, your usual linear side, like vibration motor. When, for example, you're toggling menus like this, you will feel a good click on your hand. Even when you're typing, you can set that vibration motor to vibrate very precisely to your typing, which is good and all, but I'm just really spoiled by the vibration motor on the F4 GT. This thing has a really big vibration motor, whereas on the F4, it's pretty much the same as the previous generation. It's like a small dot right here, whereas this one, it's more like an iPhone version. So subtle things like the back button gesture right here feels much more distinct on the F4 GT. When you hit like the very top or you scroll down to the bottom, you hit the very bottom, you feel that like very subtle click, much more distinct on the F4 GT compared to the F4. That's, it's there, but because the motor is not powerful enough, you kind of feel like, maybe it's there, maybe it's not. One last thing to talk about before we wrap up the video here is to talk about the performance. So why is exactly the POCO F4 uses the exact same chip as the POCO F3 from last year? Well, the short answer is because Qualcomm didn't release any successor to the 870, but there's a longer answer to this because this is a very, very good chip. The only competition is just the Snapdragon 888 or the 8 Gen 1 that you see on the F4 GT here, and they are all priced much more expensive. Now we'll do a more in-depth gaming test as I did with the F4 GT. Let me know which games that you want to be tested. But there's one very important difference on the F4 compared to the F3. I feel like this is very important, and that is the vapor chamber cooling. Basically, the F3 uses one small heat pipe to distribute all the heat, whereas on the F4 they upgraded it to a big 3,000 millimeter square vapor chamber. But on the F4 GT, that is even better. It's like 4,800 millimeters square or something, which basically spans out the whole entire phone. There's like a big block at the top here and another smaller block at the bottom. What is that for? This is also another very interesting thing. On the F4, the charging chip is basically at the top here. So if you're charging 67 watts, very high power, you're going to heat up the top part where the CPU actually is. So if you are charging while gaming, that's going to impact the performance in a way because the charging heats up the phone close to the CPU and GPU. Now on the POCO F4 GT, the charging ICs, the two charging ICs because two batteries, they are separated from the CPU. They become at the bottom with their own vapor chamber. That's why if you're charging, the only part that heats up is down here, not at the top. So basically this enables you to charge while playing, not as fast as like screen off, but it's still really fast, like 20 to 100% in half an hour or something, and it doesn't impact your gameplay too much if you are using middle to high settings, not like maxing it out. That's another really important difference between the two here. And in terms of configuration of the RAM here, as you can see, the POCO F4 starts at 6 gigabytes, ends at 8, whereas on the F4 GT, it starts at 8 gigabytes and ends at 12 gigabytes of RAM. Now, one last thing that I want to show you here is the memory speed as well as the disk speed. Let's wait until the test is done, but I just wanted to say that both uses the same UFS 3.1 storage and LPDDR5 RAM. But that's just on paper because as you can see on this test, I can run this a couple more times, but one thing is for sure. The F4 GT is almost always faster than the POCO F4. There's one reason that could explain this is because this POCO F4 GT is a 256 gigabytes version, whereas on the F4, that's only 128. So let me know if you have a 256 F4, see and check how is your speed here. This application is called a CPDT disk test. Now for the RAM speed test, I'm going to use Passmark memory test benchmark here. And as you can see, the story repeats itself again. We almost always consistently see that the F4 GT has faster RAM read and write speed compared to the F4. This could be due to the 6 gigabytes of RAM compared to 12 gigabytes of RAM we have on the F4 GT. But again, unlike the storage that you can have 256 on the F4, you cannot have 12 gigs of RAM with the F4. Okay, now let's run through some of my basic benchmark suit here. And I've done these tests before, but let's just discuss about the test here. So I've run this a couple of times, as you can see here, but on average, we can see the POCO F4 falls in line with the other 870, only that this is slightly better than the POCO F3, probably because of that better cooling. Again, with the multi-core, that score is slightly better than the POCO F3, as you can see here. Now, on the F4 GT side, we don't have much to compare here since the comparison does not have the 8 Gen 1 results. But as you can see, that's pretty much on average the score that we're getting. Now, let's move on to the next one, 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. This is the hardest test the benchmark has. And on the POCO F4 GT, we have an overall score twice as fast as the F4. Finally, on Antutu here, it's worth noting that the F4 GT is run after the Geekbench and the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. That's why the phone is hot and we are still pushing it hard. That's why the score is shy of 900,000, whereas before on a cool phone, you're going to get like 950,000 or something. So as you can see here, let's start with the F4 GT first. The temperature raises 7.4 degree from 39-ish Celsius up to 46, which is in line with our gaming test. Basically, when you push this phone really hard, it could go 45, 46 degrees. Next now, for the POCO F4, we've got about 650,000, which is very decent still, but you can see how much better the GPU is on the 8 Gen 1 compared to this. But the 8 Gen 1 runs hot. As you can see here, that only increases 5.7 Celsius from 39 up to like 45-ish. I mean, that's not that much different, 45, 46. All of these phones are still hot. That's why I'm saying, if you're pushing these phones hard, they are still passively cool. No matter what it is, you know, they will still get hot on harder gaming sessions. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the performance part, and that marks the end of the very long video. I've been recording this for hours. I hope this really helped you out in making that decision whether you want to stick with F4 or spend extra and get the F4 GT, because it is an excellent device. I've been enjoying it so much. You just have to, you know, like manage your settings in game a little bit, or else it'll be like really nice gaming device. I'm going to do a gaming test with the F4 and see how it performs. So let me know which one you want to see first. Let me know what are you most excited about and which phone are you getting. So that's pretty much it for the comparison. Thank you so much for watching. I really thank you if you stick around until this end. I'm Kenneth and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.